Welcome to the Men After God podcast, where you will be challenged and encouraged as you pursue God, achieve success, and raise a thriving family. Join your host, Dustin, and his guests on a weekly journey to grow as husbands, fathers, and men after God. Here is your host, Dustin Alley.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Men After God podcast. I'm excited to be here with you today with my guest, Todd Huff, who's just got an amazing story, an amazing talk radio program. He puts out podcasts and other different content that I know he's going to get into and you're going to love consuming. We're going to talk today just about his journey to success and how faith has played a part in that. We're going to be talking about how he has balanced the success he has found and his family life. And then what I can't wait for you to hear is the faith he's had in what God's called him to, and the investment and sacrifice he and his family have had to make to see this thing take off. Because as we pursue success for Christ, guys, we have to remember it takes sacrifice. But the payoff of what glory we can bring to God, the connections that we can make with people, and then the way we can serve people better as we see that success come to life is worth it all there in the end. But the one thing we don't want to sacrifice is our faith or our family. And I don't think Todd's done that at all. Todd, thanks for being with us today, man.
Hey, Dustin, thanks for that introduction, my friend. It's really, it's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have found your show and come across what you got going there. I love it. Take just a minute, introduce yourself to our guys. Let's talk about your family. Let's talk about the show, and then we'll keep the conversation going from there to get into some of those stories you're telling me about.
Absolutely. So, name is Todd Huff, host of the Todd Huff Show. You know, you can put the two and two together to see how we got to that point. But I'm married. I've got 3 kiddos, a 14-year-old son named Logan. I've got a soon-to-be 12-year-old daughter named Evelyn that we call Evie. And then the baby of the family is our 9-year-old daughter, Audrey. So they are, they're a blessing. And so I do this radio show and podcast. We homeschool the kids as well. And we travel the country in a fifth wheel as we try to syndicate our radio show. We're just joined, or in the process, I guess, of joining a radio network, which means we're going to be on some more stations, so we can talk about that in due course. But that's a little bit about me and my family, Dustin.
Yeah, man, I love that, Todd. And you mentioned that you're traveling around, so let's just jump into that. That's part of that faith aspect of you getting into this business that you're gifted at. God has allowed you to have and take part in. Let's tell the guys for a minute. Talk a little bit about your story you shared with me there, your salvation there, and what got you to this place of having this radio show.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a talk show host, so jump in at any time. I can get long-winded from time to time, but
go for it.
I was raised in a non-Christian home. You know, I tell people our family taught Christian values, but they didn't go to church. They didn't know Jesus. We're from a typical Midwestern, conservative Christian values sort of company. That's kind of, or a part of the country, I should say. So that's kind of the household that we grew up in. My dad worked. My mom stayed at home. My dad was a Union Democrat, and I'm a conservative talk show host now. So that's led to some interesting conversations, to say the least. But,
holidays must be fun.
We both got a sense of humor about it. But but that was my background.
It's good.
I didn't know anything about Jesus until, honestly, I went to FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes football camp in 1993 in a little bitty town called Marshall, Indiana. And the first night I remember being there and hearing the gospel, I just remember, I didn't understand at the time, I remember feeling, as the speaker was on stage and I was out in the auditorium, I remember feeling like I'm supposed to do something. I'd never been to an invitation at a church before. I didn't understand the concept of going forward to make some sort of a dedication or a prayer to receive the forgiveness of Jesus. And I just remember thinking, all these years later, I can still picture it in my head. I remember saying to God, if someone else stands up, and I think I got to that point, and some person here stood up in front of me and the speaker, and that's how it works, right? And so I stood up, I went forward,
Yeah.
And I accepted Christ, and it changed my life. I mean, I remember going in those early days to church with, reading the Bible and saying, I didn't know this. How did no one tell me about this? All these stories. I'm like, what? Why aren't we out there telling people more about this? Because it was so radical to me. And so God got a hold of me and really was teaching me things. And I had good people in my life, mentors and Sunday school teachers. I was close to the pastor. So I was blessed with having that kind of infrastructure. And that's, fundamentally part of when we get into some of those things in our show today. Some of those conversations I had 20, 30 years ago are still rooted in what we talk about today. So that's my experience coming to Christ. I graduated from a little town called Monrovia High School. And my initial intention was to go to the United States Naval Academy. I got medically disqualified after being accepted there and going through that process, and ended up going to Butler University, played football there, studied political science, philosophy. So I was in a class with atheists and communists on a regular basis.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Learning really to defend something there.
That's right. And so that's what was happening. I didn't understand at the time, but God was helping me to understand how to debate these ideas and all that sort of thing. So since the academy wasn't in the future, I decided I wanted to go to law school. So I went to a pre-law program at American University, Washington, D.C., a bunch of smart kids and some hick from Indiana. And I remember being in those classes as the only conservative Christian voice. And it really, that's really when I learned to defend, I would say, the faith and these biblical principles. And after I got done with the program, I loved the program, but I didn't want to go to law school. I just didn't feel like that's what God was calling me to do. So I spent about 3 years, sounds made up, but I ran a standardbred horse farm in a little town called Hall, Indiana, 200-acre horse farm. We raised race horses, not the thoroughbreds, the standardbreds. So they pulled the sulky. And
okay, I was gonna say, Todd, you're gonna have to help guys like me that have no idea what type of horse farm you just said. And so a standardbred horse is one that, like, it's not going to the Kentucky Derby, but he's still running some races. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
He's pulling that little driver in that little cart, if you've ever seen those, and they're either pacers or trotters.
All right. So if I go to New York City if I go out there, was that kind of like what it is? Like the people in the carriages through Central Park, like those horses?
A little, yeah. It's a specific breed, but really it's how they, it's how they, there's pacers and there's trotters. So pacers, if you can envision, they're trained so that both legs on the same side hit the ground simultaneously. So they're kind of doing this. And then trotters are more like how we walk, where right arm goes forward, back left, left leg comes forward to hit at the same time. So they're hitting.
Okay.
And that's if you break, if you violate the type of race you're in, like if they quit trotting, that they're disqualified. So, but that's what we were training. Well, I didn't really train them. I trained them to the lead line and that sort of stuff. But it was during that time that I started listening to talk radio, and it was me and the horses. And I remember telling people at the time, these are like my David years. David had sheep and I had some horses out there and nothing else. Yeah. And I had talk radio. And so I listened, I studied, and decided that's what I wanted to do. And then in 2015, started podcasting, took that show to Freedom 95, which is a station here in Indy, which is where Dave Ramsey is, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, people like that. And me now in the mornings, even though we started at 2 a.m.
Yeah, man, that's awesome.
So there you go. That's kind of a snapshot.
Yeah,
like
Todd, you mentioned that to me a little bit. Let's talk about that 2 a.m. time slot, bro. How was that, man? What was it like in your time of doing that?
It was, at the time I saw the opportunity, and I remember, the whole. You need an audience, of course, and you need advertisers. That's the two pieces to success on this.
Yeah.
And I remember getting our first 3 advertisers at 2 a.m. And one of them's still with me today. I think the other 2 would be too. One of them sold the business, and the other one, he moved on from that company. But I remember just the gratitude I had when I got payment from people who were basically just betting on me, just saying, here's a guy that I think can do something, or that God's calling to do this. And it's just kind of crazy to think back, look at it, through the lens of where we are today. And we've had a few thousand listeners at 2 a.m. So, but we moved to morning drive. Awesome. And, now it's a little bit different world, but it's still, those humble beginnings, man. I mean, it gets me a little bit when I talk about it. I love telling these stories because it just reminds me. It reminds me of where we've come from, and just, the grace of God. I mean, really, it's just incredible to think that tiny little opportunity
to have at 2 a.m. on the radio. I mean, how many people are actually listening at 2 a.m. on the radio? And you took advantage of that. And I mean, that's, the theme of our brand, Men After God, Todd, is it's achieving success with a thriving faith and family. We believe that every Christian man deserves the opportunity to succeed without losing the most important relationships in his life. And that's why we exist. And part of that success, is sacrifice, taking imperfect action. And that can relate as fathers, as husbands. It's taking those action steps to make something happen. And you talk about guys betting on you, brother. That's where we're at. Humble beginnings, man. If I could turn this camera around and show our audience, or you guys just listening just on audio, like if you could just see what I'm looking at right now, and like what I'm praying for it to be one day, it's awesome. We had an investor come to us, and man, I'm so you're an inspiration for me to know, like, you started just like we're starting, and you've got this going for you now. And that's where we're praying to be. We want to see that success come so that we can be a blessing to others and share this message. And I'll never forget the first time I got the call, like, hey, I'd like to invest in this. What? And like, great, that's awesome. And then they wrote the check, and we've been able to make some things come together with it. And we're just excited for where it's going. But so I love that, the sacrifice, the taking the imperfect action. Because I mean, to say 2 a.m. for a radio show's a great spot. Like, I just don't see that, but you worked you made it happen. Now you're on that morning drive. Now, what was it like for your family during this journey, man? Because I can't imagine being gone every night, Monday through Friday, from 2 a.m. to whenever is good, or is easy, if you will. What was it like for your wife and kids? Yeah,
well, fortunately, we pre-recorded, so I didn't have to go to studio. I did go to studio a little bit. Good. Yeah, but it's still a lot. I tell people, I've always got to be careful how I say this, because we started podcasting out of my wife's closet in our bedroom. I used to say my wife's bedroom closet. That just created more questions. But we shared the bedroom. It's her closet that was in the bedroom, and that's where we started the program. And so, it's I've done the program at every hour you can imagine. I've done it super late at night. Wow. I've done it at 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning. I've done it in the middle of the day. So, you have to work with what you have. And I think that's even something I'm still learning is do the best with what you've got. And I mean, to trust God to bless the rest. And that's honestly a point of struggle for me, because I'm such a perfectionist and I want it to be perfect. And that's okay to a point, but not if it consumes me. But it is a lot to balance with family. I mean, the kids have to be
Hey, Todd, before we jump forward, you said something I want to interrupt you on. Hey, let me interrupt you real quick, because you said something right there that I think would be beneficial for a lot of guys. If you can speak to this, you said you're a perfectionist, and it sounds like you've taken some steps past that, or seen how that can hinder you in some ways, right? Is that accurate to say?
It is. So
working through it, right? Talk about that for a minute. Talk about how you have to work through that and what success you've seen come from it.
Well, I'll tell you that when I started podcasting and I was in my wife's closet, and yes, by the way, we did have a coming out the closet episode, but we were in the closet, all in good fun. We were in the closet, and I remember I used to go back and edit out. I listened to the whole show after I did it, and I would edit out every single or whatever. And at some point, I'm thinking, what am I doing? It's not necessary to do that. And so having a show that I have to talk on every day, it pushed me to have to address the issue of perfectionism, which really for me raised its ugly head in the form of procrastination, because it's like, well, I'm not going to do it until it's perfect, right? And so, but when you have a deadline every day, it's like, you got to get with the program, man. I do my best. I let the chips fall where they may. And did I ever mess something up? I mean, I'll jokingly say on the program, hey, kind of like how Rush did, almost always right 99.6% of the time or whatever. But the truth is, of course you mess up, and you got to be okay with that. And honestly, that builds more of a trust with the audience anyway, because it's real, right? It's not overly produced. Right? Yeah. It's not too polished, or it's just like this on the show. It's just like we're sitting and talking. And so, but I'm working through the perfectionist side. In fact, I've actually started doing a little, it's like 100 lesson thing on procrastination, because it has hindered me, because I want it to be perfect. And that's sometimes perfect is the enemy of the good. Right. And we don't,
perfect's the enemy of progress is the one way we can say that. Yeah. So, I just had a coaching conversation the other day with a guy who made this exact statement to me. So it's interesting that you bring it up. He said, I want it perfect. And when I realize I can't make it perfect, I just decide not to do it. And I'm like, well, okay, but it's still got to get done. And guys, listen, just let me tell you, because I'm the opposite. I think I used to be some of that, but I've really leaned into something I learned going through courses for another guy we interviewed recently, and some entrepreneurship. And it was just take action, imperfect action, just take action, and you'll see the progress and stuff come. And so guys, listen, just if you're a person that goes through that, like, post it in our Facebook group. I'd love to talk to you about that and get some coaching to just help you be able to get to where Todd's at, man, of realizing like, no, they get this out here and be real and be authentic. Cause Todd, I had a podcast interview I was doing just like this. And I moved my hand, because if you haven't figured out, I talk with my hands, and I ended up hitting a light or something over here, and it falls over, and I'm like, yeah, well, we're not editing that out. That's just part of it. Keep going, So, yeah, man. Well, that is great. I just wanted you to speak to that for just a minute, but you were getting ready to head into a conversation about your family and how they were how your life with them was as you grew this business and opportunity you've got.
Yeah, they, of course, we homeschool, so we're around each other a lot. We all need the same space, and I don't know if I've shared yet. I think I just shared with you off camera here.
Offline, yeah.
We sold our house. We had a house as part of the process of growing the show. We actually bought a fifth wheel, and we traveled the country with that. And so we're either living in a fifth wheel or a tiny apartment now. And so we're all up in everybody's business around here. So it can be tight quarters, but I got to tell you, I mean, it's drawn us closer. That's one of the things I would say our family, they all feel it. They all understand. I think that they all understand that we're doing what God's called us to do. We don't have all the answers yet, all the pieces to the puzzle.
Right.
And, there's a part of me earlier on when I was trying to maybe shield the kids from that a little bit, but I'm like, no, man, they need to know, because they're going to have their own journey. Right. And Dad doesn't know.
So good.
This is what Dad feels like he's called to do. This is what Mom and Dad agree on. And this is the step we're going to take. We don't know what's going to happen after this. I mean, some of these selling a house is a big deal, and living in a camper. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. But especially for a family of 5, man. Yeah.
And 2 dogs. Let me throw in the 2 dogs factor. So, it's been,
oh my goodness.
It's been a blessing in that sense. And, I think of what our kids have seen. And I guess that's what I would encourage people listening is to keep in mind that, our kids are sponges, and they observe us, they pay attention to us, even when they might get attitudes or whatever else. But the best way they can see your faith is not through just like, and there's nothing wrong with learning verses. I'm not saying that, but it's not hammering into them all these lessons. It's them to see it. And even to see it when there's struggle, like I think I've been reading a lot of the Old Testament lately, and I think about these stories. Like, what did Abraham and Isaac talk about on the way up Mount Moriah? What was that like, right? Dad, where's the, I see the, I see the altar. Yeah. Where's the sacrifice, right? And, I wonder about those things sometimes. And, you're reminded when they crossed the Jordan River and they had the Ebenezer stones. And it says, whenever you walk past those stones, you're to tell your kids. It's not a prepared lesson. It's like, oh, you see those stones? No. Well, let me tell you the story about that. Let me tell you a part of it maybe I didn't tell you before. But those stones are there because they're part of your journey. Those stones are there as reminders of what God brought you through. Those stones are there as reminders for where God can take you next and what God is going to do with you. He's not finished, right? We don't know what your chapter of life looks like. But I can tell you, we're all going to have that moment where we are given the choice to follow him into the what feels like the great abyss, or to tell him no.
Yeah.
And that's what it came down to for us. And that's, I know I do want to talk about faith a little bit, because that is something.
Yeah, man, go for
it. Then I just will. I don't want to keep monopolizing here, but I had a meeting.
Man. Hey, listen, my interview here is for these guys to hear the value you can bring to them. So the more you talk, the better it is. The fact you're a talk radio guy makes my job really easy today.
That's right. But I remember I used to be a part of a Christian business leaders group. It was a great group. It just didn't work with my schedule because of the time of the show and everything. But I remember I was on my way to meet with a guy for lunch from that group. And I saw on the top of our bread box, back we still had the house then, there was a verse, 1 Thessalonians 5:24. And it says, and of course I'm drawing a blank as I'm doing this, faithful is the one who calls you, and he will do it. So that's as I'm walking out the door, get in my truck, whatever, drive to the lunch, sit down, and I'm talking with this gentleman who's in our group, who's just, you can just feel the Spirit of God coming out of this guy all the time. And we start talking, and he goes, Todd, he goes, there's a verse in the Bible. I kid you not, Dustin. He said, there's a verse in the Bible. He said, and it says, faithful is the one who calls you, and he will do it. And he said, I think it's in, and he said a book. And I said, Richard, it's 1 Thessalonians 5:24. He's like, no, I don't think it's it. And I said, the only reason I know that's because 45 minutes ago, I saw that verse right beside the door. I don't even know where it came from. It was on this little bookmark or something. And faithful is the one who calls you, and he will do it. And that is, there's one thing to believe it here. It's another to believe it here, right? Where you actually
absolutely
live it out, where you say, it's not just an intellectual activity. In fact, I think that's one of the problems we have in our culture today, is that too many of us look at faith as something that we like. I read my Bible, I went to church, I did this, but God's calling us to put feet to that faith. And it doesn't mean he's calling us all to do even the same thing or similar. It's his prerogative, but our prerogative is to listen. And faith means to truly trust him. And I'm going to tell you something, Dustin. This process taught me that I confused faith with hope. I think I'm a very optimistic guy. I always had hope. Yeah. I'm always like, we can do this, whatever. But God says that faith is not hoping I do the right thing. Faith is knowing I do it. Faith is knowing that I'm going to do for you, Todd, what I promised you I would do. Faith is knowing that it's actually impossible for it not to happen when I declare it. You know what I mean? And so that is a whole nother level for me. And I still kick and scream sometimes, Dustin. It's not an easy journey because he stretches that faith muscle and he asks, do you believe me? Do you trust me? So
and that trust is needed, especially, when you're going out to the deep water, if you will, right? What I think's great is, in my journey, I've seen that God doesn't call me to have faith in him. let's say this, how can I say this? For me, I have tried to have faith in God in things that I wanted done rather than putting my faith in God for what he wants done.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that for me was finding what has God made me for, right? And it's just as I've grown through my time in the Marine Corps, my time in ministry, and the things that God has just gifted me with, putting a camera on me and giving me a microphone is one of the easiest things I can sit here and do, man. Just sit here and talk, especially if we're talking about Bible or business. I mean, I love those conversations, and family, just talking about anything really, right? And I mean, I have a kindred spirit here of, this is what you do every day. I love preaching. I love doing those things. And when I am following God, I've seen him call me to things that he equips me for. Right? I may not feel adequate. I may not feel capable, but it's things that once I get into, I'm like, oh, wow, God, you've actually really made me for this, and you're wanting me to do it. And that's why I leaned in with Men After God. And I think that's why you leaned in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you leaned into your talk show. And we've spent a lot of time talking about your life and how you've got there. And I love your faith journey, man. That is wonderful. Talk about God's giftedness for you and how that got you to open the talk show. And guys that are listening while he's talking, I want you to be thinking for a minute, like, what's God gifted you in? Like, if you're one of those guys that's working a 9 to 5 and thinking about getting out into the business world or starting your own thing or whatever it might be, like, determine what God has made you for and pursue after that. You may have been told growing up, find something you love to do and have someone pay you for it. I used to think that meant find a job you like to do and get paid for it. Well, it might be something completely different for you, though. You don't really, he's starting a podcast and different things like this. There's no boss. There's no company that's writing paychecks. I wish there was. It'd make this a lot easier,
That's right.
But that's where the faith comes in, And so just talk about leaning into your giftedness and just the show. Give us a rundown of it and talk about that for a good 5-10 minutes.
Well, it's funny that what you said there resonates with me too, because I mean, when I was first at Butler, I was quiet. I'm actually an introvert, and so to do this every day seems a little foreign in a sense. But it also, when I first started podcasting, you don't have the benefit, because I'm doing it by myself. I don't have the benefit of seeing a face, someone in the audience nodding or shaking their head. And so you have to be in your head to do those things. And so in a weird way, God had to, there was an adjustment of just getting comfortable with it. But I remember when I was on that horse farm listening to talk radio, like this is 20 years ago. I remember doing mock interviews in my head. I remember coming up with sermons as I was running the weed eater, or coming up with things that I probably say today, And so all the things that I did, as I look back, I was a horse farmer. I was a salesperson. I worked at a marketing firm. I ran a Boys and Girls Club. I was an entrepreneur. And all those things, it's what I do today is, as weird as it sounds, is kind of a conglomeration of what I needed to do here. And so God was preparing me all the way, even though I didn't maybe see that at the time. So, but I will say this, and I hesitate to say this because some people misunderstand. We all have gifts. Like, my kids are artistically gifted. I can't draw a stick man, and they make things.
Yeah, I draw crooked stick figures. That's what I tell people.
In fact, my youngest daughter, she started crocheting animals. She made she makes some really cool ones. She made me an eagle. But I mean,
oh man, that looks awesome.
The things that we all have gifts, right? We all have talents, and you have to be okay with it. And as being a person that, as weird as this might sound, I don't even really like the limelight, but I have to be in it for what I do. But I can also tell you that the easiest part of my day is when I get to get behind this microphone and talk. And to me, because there's been times I've told my wife, because the business side of this can be difficult. I mean, you may have noticed there's not, there's 24 hours a day. You may have noticed that most of these talk radio shows are 3 hours. So that means there's 8 shows a day, right? And how do you compete with that when you've got names like Mark Levin or Sean Hannity or whatever else? And the answer is the grace and favor of God and the gifts He's given you. And there are times I do this show and I turn off the microphone, and I promise you, I'm like, how did I do that? And I mean, I really just, it's the gift of God. And I've just come to be okay with that, and like, there's times it's my job to prepare. I'm not saying you just sit there and wake up and turn on the microphone and get at it, but you also have to try. There's a faith element of that too. Like, God has gifted me. He's equipped me. My job is to do the best today. But I really do lean into that. It's the easiest part of my day most days. And it just comes so naturally. It really does. And I would say to your audience, if there's something like that for you, where you just feel like this is my element, and a lot of guys don't want to say that. It's like, I don't want to be braggish or anything like that. But to be honest with yourself, if you're in your element, I mean, there's a chance that maybe God's trying to say, hey, dude, like, let's do something here. Yeah. I mean, let's work with this.
Yeah.
So,
right. Because he's made us all for specific things. And the sooner we just lean into how God's made us, man, I know for me, like you said, get behind this microphone, standing on the platform, preaching, stuff like that. That is the easiest part of my day. And there's some people that look at it and go, I could never do that. I'd never want to do that. And then I look at people at work with Excel sheets all day, and I'm like, I could never do that. Like, I would never want to. And so we lean into that gifting and let God use us. And you're doing that with your show. And so talk about your show. I love the line on your website about being able to disagree with people, but basically still be friends, right? And you do it with humor and different stuff like this. What's it like to listen to the Todd Huff Show?
Yeah, well, if you can see the eagle behind me, he's holding a little banner that says "Conservative, not bitter," and that's the tagline of the show. I'm not a screamer. I want to be a peacekeeper, I guess, a peacemaker, not at the expense of compromising principles, but understanding that
right.
A lot of times, I think Americans are on the same page in a lot of ways. In fact, I say on the show, 80% of the people in this country would agree with 80% of what I have to say. And I believe that. And I think sometimes we become so polarized, right? You got your tribe of this, your tribe of that, and you start mentioning names of, say, politicians or just, heck, baseball teams, right? I mean, people are ready to fight over some of this stuff. And we got to get past that. And also understand that that's the world that we live in today. Everything's political. What you eat, what you drink, what you drive, what you wear, where you work. You told me you're in Connecticut. I mean, I immediately think, oh boy, Connecticut, it's rough. I'm in the middle of Indiana, And so I just, you think about these things, and that's our world. But to me, the purpose of our show is to help others hear and receive truth. And I don't mean to say that. I say on the show, I say, those of you who listen might think I've got it all figured out. It may surprise you that I don't. But the things that we do have figured out,
right?
The things that we know to be true, that have been revealed to us by God, that we've learned through experience, like, we better pass that on. Because if we don't speak those truths, the deceivers step in, right? And there is, it fills that void with something. And it's lies and deceit. That's why we got to mess with the trans agenda and all these other things now, because we have stepped back. We basically said that that's not our place, our job, but we've got to speak these truths, and you got to speak it in love. And so I think sometimes we miss the boat, and we think if we just say it louder, if we come up with a funnier meme, that it's going to convince somebody. But usually, and I think that's what we'll talk about for your subscribers, is there's things that we can do to make ourselves more persuasive, right? And there are things, some very, very easy things that we can do that are. I actually had, if I can again, I got stories coming out of my mind left and right here.
Yeah,
I had a guy. Man. His name was Doug. Doug was in Colorado. Doug was a liberal, and he called into my show, or he emailed in. And he said he lost a bet with his friends who were Trump supporters. And he said, my friends said as a result of my losing this bet, he had to like shave his head and paint Trump something in his side of his head. And he said, and I had to call you because they thought you would like this. And I'm like, is this some kind of prank or what? So I eventually, after researching him a little bit, I reach out to him and I'm like, hey man, I said, your friends were right. I do enjoy this. And I said, let me tell you, I said, you made the bet, not me. I said, and if that's the consequence, that's the consequence. I said, we're going to talk to you. We were going to interview him and put him on the show. And I said, I just want you to know that we're going to treat you respectfully. I'm not here to belittle you. I mean, we'll have a little fun at your expense. You're the one that made the bet, remember? And so we had a couple of conversations. Right. And Dustin, I kid you not, I promise you, and I didn't even do anything. After our second conversation, which was a long one, he said to me, he said, this has not been anything like I expected. He said, you've treated me in a very Christ-like manner. I never said, hey man, I'm going to treat you in a Christ-like manner. I just tried to do that, right? And he said, after talking with you, he said, everything, he said, I'm questioning everything. He said, I'm even thinking about going back to church. And I remember thinking, like, what the world just happened here? Because all I did was listen to the guy.
Yeah.
I didn't like have some well-defined argument. I mean, I would push back on a couple things he would say, but I mean, 5%. I just let him talk. I listened to him. And to have him say he's rethinking his entire worldview, he's thinking about going back to church. It's just amazing to me. I just think that people, if we go in looking for a fight, that's what we're going to get, right? We're going to get a fight.
Oh, absolutely.
And we don't have to. We don't have to. Too much is at stake. We better figure out how to communicate these things so that they're effective, not just so that we get the most thumbs up on Facebook or something like that. So.
Man, you hit a key point there of just listening with anyone, whether it's someone of the opposing political view, a religious view, our wife, whenever we're having an argument. Sometimes we just need to listen, and it can really change perspective and stuff. We take on, I think, the mantle sometimes of, well, I have to be the one that makes them change the way they think about insert whatever that is here, right? And when we do that, we're putting ourselves in this position to where if they say anything opposing to whatever we want them to believe, well, then we're going to have to attack it. Whereas if we, again, as believers, talking to people about our faith, but even political view, if you will, like the Holy Spirit of God does a great job on his own and doesn't really need me to change the heart. I can just provide some information, get them to ask questions, because this is something I'm teaching my 11-year-old son. And I don't know if you have to teach some of your kids this. Maybe if you're listening, your kids, our audience, your kids might not argue. Mine do. And so I'm teaching my 11-year-old son when it comes to his siblings and others, like, hey, man, did you know that if you are right, you don't have to prove it? Like if you're right, they're going to see it. It's going to come out. The truth will come out, I believe is the phrase, right? I said, so you don't have to like prove yourself right if they're just going to see that you were right. And then when they see that, you don't have to go back and say, see, told you so. You can just let them question it, let them work through it. And if they come back to you and say, hey man, you were right, well then great. You did an awesome job at maybe presenting a view and then or understanding what was going in place and then going on, and then they change their review because of it. But if we're forcing that's where we get into trouble. So when we begin to force our ideals on others. And as a believer, this is hard for some to hear, but let me tell you guys, we have to accept that other people don't believe in Jesus. And when I say that's fine, I don't mean that I want them to not believe in Christ. I don't mean I want them to die and go to hell. I mean, I have to know that some people are just not going to put their faith in him. And if I try to force it, then that goes back to that head knowledge versus heart knowledge you mentioned at the beginning. And so, man, Todd, I know you're on a little time crunch, so we're going to have to wrap up here. I tell you what, take take a minute, because I like to ask our guys that come on, take just a minute. I want you to think of just an entrepreneur, a man with a family that would like to get his business started. And like, what's some advice you'd give him based on your journey and your experience to get that going? What's some things he could do to just make that happen in his life? And while you think on that, I want to talk to our listeners for a minute. Guys, listen, I want to thank you for tuning in today. This has been an awesome conversation with Todd. I hope you'll go subscribe to his podcast. I believe Todd's the same name, Todd, the Todd Huff Show. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Same name there. So go subscribe to that. And if you're in an area where his radio show's on, support him by listening there and checking him out. And guys, again, his journey has been so phenomenal to hear, and the sacrifice that he's made to get to where he's at. Men, that is exactly what it will take sometimes, is some sacrifice. And we have to be willing to do that. But remember, don't sacrifice the most important thing in your life, your faith and your family. For our founding members, guys, listen, you are going to love what Todd's going to talk to us about when we're recording that. We are going to be having a conversation about how to have those conversations, how to listen, how to engage people with different opinions, and how to have some fun with it. And so I hope that you guys will jump on there and enjoy that this week. And if you're not a founding member, you can go to patreon.com/menaftergod, sign up to be a founding member. This package is available for only up until December of this year, 2023. And you get a free piece of merch from our store, which we've got some new merch that may be out by the time this episode comes out. But we got merch a free piece of merch. You get 4 free coaching calls with me if you choose to use them. You get a free coaching call with our training and nutrition coach, a free coaching call with our finance coach, and a free coaching call with our relationship coach. And then you're going to get a lifetime 10% discount on all products that Men After God produces, all for $833 a month for 1 year. It totals about $99.96. So $100 and a year, and you get all of those things that I just listed there. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. Patreon.com/menaftergod. All right, Todd, let's go like 3 minutes and talk to that guy that just needs to get that business started, wants to get things going. What's some things you'd tell him?
Well, the first thing I would tell him is to spend some time on his knees. I think as cliched as that can be, if we pour it out to God first, a lot of the mistakes that I've made, I think, were more of God help fix the problem I've created versus God bless, show me what to do next. And I'm literally at that point now. Okay, God, like, what do you want me to do next? And to listen and to act on that. And that is, I think action is a huge key. I know earlier we talked about my perfectionist tendencies. I'm actually a guy, like I never stop acting, but I hit these roadblocks. And then if I'm acting in the wrong manner, it just turns into worry. Right. And there's like, it's the cycle in my head where I'm trying to solve a problem, but we just have to take the next step. We have to do the next best thing with what we've been given. And I know a lot of this stuff is super like simple and basic, but honestly, the success that I have had in the business world, it came more from things like the lessons I learned playing football than what I learned in the classroom. It's more about tenacity and work ethic and teamwork than it is about how I did on the sociology exam back in 2003.
I hated that class.
Yeah. I mean, so I think some people, I would try to surround myself with people who can speak both encouragement and some of the hard things, because we have to be willing to hear the hard things. We just don't want to hear, hey, you can do it. Sometimes it's, hey, you can do it, but hey, dude, you got to quit doing this or start doing that.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with people that have some of the talents you don't have, and know what those are. You don't have to solve. As an entrepreneur, you wear a lot of hats, especially when you're starting, but you don't have to bear those burdens forever. Find the people that have the skill set, trust in them, and let them do their work, even if they can't do it as well as you can. I mean, when I had to pass it off to our sales team, I mean, they're not as effective as I was. But you got to ask yourself, if having a team of 4 or 6 or 10 people, is better than having one person do it, you're never going to scale, right? So we all have those points in the business that we have to make those choices. So And I'm going through that right now. So anyway, but that's kind of what I would say. But honestly,
That's
to
awesome.
me,
That's good.
spending your time in prayer is huge. And if God tells you to move, then move. I mean, I know that sounds so simplistic, but sometimes we'll say, God told me to move. Let me think about it. We're acting like Gideon putting the fleece out. There's a saying that says, "Don't let what God tells you in the dark. Don't forget what God tells you in the dark. What He told you in the light." I mean,
Yep.
those are things that I think practically matter on that level.
Oh man, that is good, guys. If like that was worth listening to the whole interview here. That was just phenomenal, Todd. Thank you so much for bringing that to our guys. Listen, men, thanks for being on the Men After God podcast, Todd. Guys, thanks for listening in. We're going to go ahead and head off for the day. You guys can catch our next episode next week. Don't forget facebook.com/Men After God podcast. Follow us on there. And if you want to join our community, facebook.com/groups/Men After God. Todd, I can't wait to start listening to your show, and I hope some of our guys will too. Thanks again for being on here, brother.
Dustin, it's been a pleasure, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to the Men After God podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and keep up with the show by following us at facebook.com/Men After God. You can also reach out to Dustin personally at Dustin@seekconsulting.us with any questions or for coaching on being a man after God. Until next time.